Cool. Let's, so now I get to hear if I can hear myself, because I have two.
But then when you hear it,
What?
It's going to be playing while he's speaking?
No, I just wanted to see for a second to see if it really works. So I can hear how I'm heard.
Do you want coffee or anything?
Yes, please, thank you.
I'm assuming you liked last time.
What?
I'm assuming
Yeah, it's that easy.
It's very nuanced.
1, 2, 3. Yeah, you can hear it. Great. Yeah, it's that easy. 1, 2, 3. We're going to start in 2 minutes. My dear sister has joined. Osnat, you can say, you can type something and then... We're going to start in 2 minutes. Cool. My dear sister has joined. Osnat, you can say, type something. And they're watching from Vietnam. I can't resist. Good morning, Vietnam!
Do you want to... No.
And they're watching from Vietnam. I can't resist. Good morning, Vietnam!
Who's in Vietnam?
My sister and brother-in-law.
They live there?
No, they're on a trip. How do you stop this thing?
It's so beautiful.
Yeah, it is. It is very beautiful. Anyway. This beauty of technology. Okay. Thanks. Okay, so we're going to start, regardless of... Okay. So what we're going to start with is a question, and it's a question between how Jewish philosophy and how Jewish mysticism sees a mitzvah that appears in our parsha, and they see it completely differently. The mitzvah that I'm referring to is, just a second. The mitzvah I'm referring to is Lo tevashel gedi b'chalev imo, which is actually the source. You shall not cook a kid, meaning a baby goat, in its mother's milk, which is actually the source for most of the Jewish dietary laws, which have to do with separating milk and meat. Now, this mitzvah, this very phrase, Lo tevashel gedi b'chalev imo, actually repeats 3 times in the Chumash. So the first time is here in our parsha. And because it's repeated 3 times, so for instance, the sages learn from this that each one has to be something separate, each one has to be a different issue. So from one we learn the prohibition to eat, from one we learn the prohibition to cook, which is the pshat of the pasuk, the literal meaning, and from one we learn the prohibition to enjoy, to get enjoyment from something that was cooked, meat with milk. So for instance, this becomes a question if somebody owns shares of McDonald's, right? Because you're getting enjoyment from the fact that somebody is cooking meat with milk together. It's a different question than the question of whether you eat it or whether you cooked it yourself. But even getting enjoyment from it is prohibited. Now, what kind of prohibition is this? So it falls into a category that maybe we wouldn't initially think that it's there, but it falls into the category of mixing 2 kinds that can't be mixed. What's another example of this? Another example is shatnez. Shatnez means that you can't take flax and wool and weave them together into a single garment. The only exception to that is the clothing of the priests in the temple, where the avnit, where their belt, or the thing they would wrap around themselves, was made from wool and flax together. And another exception is tzitzis, meaning that in a place of a mitzvah, we learn from this a very important principle, b'mikom mitzvah lo gazru, that there's no gzerah, there's no prohibition in a place of a mitzvah. Okay? When there's a mitzvah, so for instance, we need to take a shofar out. Okay? So lechatchila from the Torah, even if you need to blow a shofar on Shabbos, there's no question that you're allowed to. Why? Because it's a mitzvah. We prohibit it today. We don't blow shofar when Rosh Hashanah is on Shabbos, because there are many laws associated with carrying it in the public domain. So for that reason we prohibit it, but it's not the prohibition to blow the shofar itself on Shabbos. So this whole thing of chalav and basar, of milk and meat, actually falls under the category of shatnez, of kil'aim, really is what it's called.
And you can mix milk and meat if it's for a mitzvah.
No.
Okay.
If there was a place in the Mikdash, for instance, in the Beit HaMikdash, that it would be necessary to do this, a performance or a mitzvah would be, but there is none. We never do it. We never use milk in the Beit HaMikdash. Right, that it has to be for a particular mitzvah that the Torah gave you. It's not that you decide it's a mitzvah.
No,
the Torah says.
To feed a poor person is a mitzvah, so all I have is like a non-kosher dish.
No, settle, that's pikuach nefesh, that's something else. If you don't have anything to eat, then there becomes a whole question about whether it's become permissible to eat something that is forbidden, meaning it remains forbidden, it's just that the Torah tells you you're now permitted to eat it because otherwise you will starve. Or does it actually become a heter? Does it actually become permissible? And so there's two different opinions. The Tanya takes the opinion that it remains forbidden, and therefore you still have to do tshuva on it afterwards, meaning you have to get it out of your system, as it were. You have to find a way to get it out. Yeah.
When these people that are very, very firm people who have a hotel that's open on Shabbat, or who have a pharmacy that's open on Shabbat, and they enjoy from that money on Shabbat, and they have some contract that they sometimes do, or something that is sort of, I don't know.
It's all very technical.
And there's a long beard in the street, and they're enjoying the money from Shabbat that's open.
So in principle, it's forbidden.
It's forbidden.
But there are ways to do a shutafut, to have a partnership with somebody who isn't Jewish, and there's no isur to receive money in a certain way on Shabbat from something like that. But I don't want to get into it. But it's very, very technical. So it's actually what the laws of Shabbos start with two simanim that have to do with these types of partnership, and they're considered to be the hardest simanim in all of Orach Chaim, in all that part of Shulchan Aruch, because they're very, very detailed. In any case, getting back to the topics, now we have milk and meat is actually a type of kilaim. What is kilaim? Kilaim is when you take the one people mostly remember is that you take two types of seed, okay, and you plant them too close to one another, I mean in the same aruga. This has become an issue today. Like for instance, there's these hanging gardens inside people's homes. So you should know that they're so close there that there's no question that there is kilayim. Except the question then becomes, because they're in separate compartments altogether, that the roots can't combine if that's the way it's built. It depends on how it's built. So it might be that it is permissible.
They're little sacks.
Okay. But if they're in any way that close, that's kilayim. There's another type of thing called kilei akerim that you put into a vineyard. You're not allowed to plant anything else. And the same thing with kilei ilanot, that if you have a tree, there's a certain minimum distance that you have to stay away from it in order to plant a vegetable or some other fruit-bearing tree. What's the idea behind all of these? That when Hashem created the world, when God created the world, He put borders. It's called the Shem Shakai. He placed borders within reality, within nature, so that things wouldn't mix. And if you overturn these barriers, if you go against them, it's called going against nature. So these are the most natural laws that there are. There's another type of kilaim, which is lo tachosh b'shor v'chamo yachdav. That you can't plow with a donkey and with an ox together. The idea there is, it's not exactly nature already, it's something higher, that the donkey is not a kosher animal, and the ox is, and you're mixing something that's kosher with something that's not kosher. Okay? That's at least how people usually explain it. And then when it comes to the shatnez, it's even further removed, because here we're talking about garments. There's nothing natural about it. And you're not doing anything in nature. You've removed another level higher. So in general, the idea, the way we usually explain these is that the kilaim, it goes higher and higher. But between the shatnez in a garment of flax and wool, and between the donkey and the ox, lies the basar v'chalav, the milk and meat. It's considered to be an intermediate stage between the garment and plowing and a tool, if you want. Why is it an intermediate stage? Because the garment is completely external to you. But the milk and meat you already internalize by eating. So it does become, and has more of a chance of becoming part of nature than does the garment.
That's strange, because you can't get hana'ah from milk and meat together. You can get hana'ah from two seeds that are
Right,
together.
of course. That's why it's not allowed.
I don't know, I'm saying it should be strict. The closer it is to the nature, it should be stricter. Like, can you get hana'ah from shatnez?
No, the idea here is that to mix them, there's a way you mix. Mm-hmm. Each one of them has a different way to mix. You can't mix an ox with a donkey by creating a hybrid. They don't mix, they're two species. Mm-hmm. So what is the mixing between two species of animals? You use them together in the plow. When you're talking about a garment, there are certain rules about how it needs to be weaved. In fact, according to the Torah, it has to be shua, tuz, v'nez. It has to be a three-way weave that really connects them together. Makes it. No, you can't. Of course not. You can't use it. That's the whole point. You can't wear it. You can't wear it. You're not allowed to do it, and you also can't wear it afterwards. No, you have to take it apart. You have to completely remove it.
Business that sells shatnez.
Of course not. How could you?
How come I can eat like a fruit that's two mixed seeds together?
Who said you can? It's kilayim. You're not allowed to eat
Don't
it.
we all do that all the time?
What?
Aren't there fruits that are hybrid fruits?
That's something else entirely. The whole thing about hybrid, exactly, that's different. You're not planting them together. You're creating something new. You're creating something new, which is a different topic altogether. You're not planting them. I mean, they're not battling, as it were, for the same soil. You're creating something entirely new. No, kilei zraim is not when you mix something. It's when you plant them together. That's what's forbidden, not what you would call GMO in some way. But when it comes to milk and meat, the way to mix them is to cook them. It's not, even according to the Torah, there's no kavush. Kavush means that you put them you immerse them together. Meaning, I would like because immersion cooks over 24 hours. This simple idea that if you leave something in water for 24 hours, the water seeps in. Doesn't matter what it is. It'll get into it. So it's like cooking in that sense. Okay, this is all just an introduction to get to the philosophical difference between the way Jewish philosophy sees this and the way mysticism sees it. And Jewish philosophy says, what are you doing? Like we just said, you are taking two things that in and of themselves are permissible. You're allowed to plow with an ox. You're allowed to plow with a donkey. You just can't put them together. You're allowed to plant this tree, you're allowed to plant that tree. Just don't plant them. Each one is permissible in and of itself for that particular act. The same thing is true about milk and meat. Milk separately is fine, and meat separately is fine. So what happens when you mix them together? So we said it already. It means that you're going against the grain of nature. That nature wants it a certain way. When Hashem created the world, He put some borders between these things. Each one has a different border, and you can think a lot about why that's the border for each particular species. But in the end, the mixture is between two things that each is permissible separately. But the Zohar on our Parsha says something completely different. It says that the moment that you mix them, one of them falls into the klipa. One of them becomes unholy. Yeah, just one of them. And the other one is affected by that fall, and it receives from the klipa also, but it doesn't become a klipa itself. A klipa means like a negative energy. So why this difference between the two? So you have to say that the Zohar sees things in a deeper light. If you want, it sees things in a more psychological vein. And what it's saying is that if two things are permissible and you make a mistake, you do something that would make them not permissible, then what will happen is that eventually one of them will fall down and not just be like, if you could separate it out, it would be fine, but it would be ruined at its core. Something will happen to it at its core. Let's take an example. If you follow like Eastern meditation, and there they tell you that there's two things. There are two separate things. There's two separate things. There's the nothingness and the being. Okay? And they tell you, look, really, you're a being, so you have to completely void yourself. Completely get into a state of nothingness. So what have you done? You've taken the being and you've mixed it together with nothingness. And you're saying that nothingness has to completely win here. What happens over time? You'll have to backlash against it. Your being will have to come back. Meaning, if you don't allow being to exist, it'll eventually retaliate. And it will come back broken and blemished. Explain what I mean. That if you don't allow a person to have an ego at all, then eventually that ego is going to come back with a vengeance. That's what Freud calls repression. You can't tell a person, look, there's no room for an ego. Meaning there's no I. If you tell them there's no I, eventually that I will become your worst nightmare. Whereas if you decide that what you want to do is get them to each one give what it needs to give and not mix them in the wrong way, then it'll work. Then the I, you can rectify the I, and you rectify it by borrowing from the nothingness. That's how by giving it bittul, by giving it selflessness. So since we're live, so I need to read what somebody wrote. The whole idea that I was given this big, huge phone is so that I could read during. So somebody said, I've got to be honest here, but for the most part, I find the students, not related at all. No, they can't hear the questions. For the most part, I can't hear the students' questions. So she doesn't know. So either I'll repeat them or sorry. So I thought this was more of something about me. and something I could address. But okay, I can address
Sorry,
this.
just the I
Okay.
of nothing is you're just taking two ideas. Like I'm saying, there's something.
Right.
One represents the I, represents the nothing, or it's just abstract. Then specific.
No, one says, one method is like Western psychology, which says, I have to strengthen your ego. And we'll talk more about what that means today. And the other method says, no, Eastern philosophy or psychology, if you want, says the opposite. I don't want the ego at all. Now, if you mix the two together and you say the nothingness has to overcome, what happens is eventually the ego will fall into the klipa. When you take these two things and you put them together, because they don't mix, or they don't mix in the right way, right? Like kilaim, I mixed them the wrong way. It's not that they can't. I can each one. Not only that, like we said, afterwards, after I've grown two types of fruit, and they were far enough in between the trees, so I can eat the two fruit together in the same meal. There's no problem with it. Or if I wait enough time between milk and meat, I can eat the milk and eat the meat. There's no problem. You can have them in some way together. The problem is when you put them really together too much in the wrong way, eventually one of them will fall into the klipa.
That's what Jewish mysticism is saying about that.
That's what?
Jewish mysticism says about Quran.
Right. That's how the Zohar explains that it's not just that these two things remain permissible, it's just their mixture that becomes forbidden. It's that one of them actually falls into the klipot, and it becomes part of the klipa. And not only that, the other one is also affected by it then. Eventually, the nothingness will also not be nothingness. So, in general, this is what you can relate to Freud's idea of repression and why repression doesn't work. We had a lot to say about that in a different context. Some remember, some don't. But in any case, okay. So, if this is true, so now I want to ask a different question. Why is it then that in our psyche there's two different souls? The divine soul and the animal soul. Isn't it a kilaim? You're sticking two things together that are very different. One is above, one is below. And you bring them together. So what, didn't Hashem make kilaim here? Didn't He make some kind of mixture? And you see from the effects that it drives everybody crazy. So maybe it is a type of, maybe there's something wrong with this whole thing of mixing these two together. You know, Mekubalim, for instance, we'll see in a moment that it's even more than that, but Mekubalim, for instance, don't put their fingers together. Right? Why? Because you're mixing the right and the left. Where did they get that idea? Because in each one of these mixtures, one is the right and one is the left. Okay? And it changes. It's not like the way you would think. And if you put your hands together, so it's right on the left. Set it. What about the divine soul and the animal soul? So I could say...
Soul is not actually bad and good. It's not a bad and good, as we learned before.
Okay, but neither...
It's an energy. It's a strong energy.
It's not bad and good at all, but neither are milk and meat. There's nothing wrong with them, each one of them separately. And that's the whole premise, that we don't have anything wrong with them. But when you mix them together, it becomes a catalyst, like it falls apart. And most people don't know what to do exactly. They're stuck. So it's a good sign that something here is a type of kilaim, maybe.
Unless there's a mitzvah involved.
So, not bad. So what would be the mitzvah? So the idea that's been presented is maybe like in Shatnez, there's a mitzvah here. What would be the mitzvah? So we would say, so I think it's a great idea, that the mitzvah would be that all my service, talking about Beit HaMikdash is in the communal sense, serving Hashem. But each one of us separately, our service is based on this conflict between them. Meaning if I didn't have them together, I wouldn't be able to serve God at all. We have to get deeper into this idea, but what you're presenting is is at least the beginning. Okay? So I would think that maybe that this is all because this is how a human being is built and structured. There's no other way. Without this, I wouldn't be a human being. By the way, in a Jew we say that it's the divine soul and the animal soul. What do we say in a non-Jew? We say it's the intellectual soul and the animal soul. And the intellectual soul would be like what Freud would call the superego, what forms into the superego, and the animal soul is the ego or the id. But it's the lower part. So every person has a higher and lower. And without that tension between them, he's not a human being. To say it another way, a human being by nature is conflicted. You can't be any other way. Because if you're not, you become an animal. Animals don't have dilemmas, and they don't really have conflicts. This is another interesting thing that comes out of this whole Lo tevashel gdi b'chalev imo. You shouldn't cook a kid in his mother's milk. Why? Because the word imo is equal to ulai. This is a kavanah that's brought in the Arizal. What's the idea here? That imo here is like that the whole question here is it's raising a conflict. But in a human being, that conflict is essential. Without that, you go down to the level of an animal. Animals don't have conflicts. What's a conflict? The conflict is, like we try to say about the like Aesop's fables, why they're not really real. Because the fox there, he's not, or like take another way. The psychologists always bring this experiment that you give a monkey a box with a banana inside, and he can only put his hand in if it's open, right? If it's like this. But there's no room for him to pull out the banana. Like if he tries to do that, he gets stuck. So that's like a conflict. That's the highest conflict that an animal can get to. And even then, he doesn't get it that it's a conflict really. Just by trial and error, at some stage, he'll see that, I have to, if I want my hand back, I have to let go of the banana. But the question is whether, in the end, he's disappointed. And what is he disappointed by? So when you're a little kid, you're at the level maybe of the monkey. But as you grow older, you see that the conflicts are much more delicate. And they're much more moral. And it's always between two things that are very difficult to decide between. So that's what it means to be a human being. So a human being has to have these two poles. That I have a divine soul or an intellectual soul that tells me about higher morality and being a human. And I have to have my animal soul, which gives me the other pole, which is, do you want to stoop down to the level of an animal? And you have to work between them. That's the nature of being a human being. Meaning, if somebody comes to a psychologist and says, everything's fine. So he really needs a lot of therapy. Because if everything's fine, so where's the human in you? Where did it go? So you either one of two things. Either, like Rav Steinsaltz, should be healthy. He says, if you wake up in the morning and the birds are chirping and everything's fine, there's nothing wrong. So one of two things happened. Either you went to heaven at night, you died. And that's why suddenly everything's fine. Or the Mashiach came. So that's also a possibility. Or there's a third possibility, which is I've completely given into my animal soul. I've decided to live like an animal. And then also everything's fine. Because animals don't have problems with parnasa, they don't have problems with their siblings, and they don't have problems with anybody. Everything's fine and dandy. So to be a human being means I have to be conflicted. There's no other option. It's not that if I solve this conflict, then I'll be done. Oh, if I just had this one finished, I'll just figure this one out, then I'll be fine. No. By definition, like Reb Nachman likes to say it in the sense of there's nothing more whole than a broken heart, what he means to say, it's a conflicted heart. That it's not, this world is not a world of solutions, it's a world of problems. Or like Reb Shlomo Karlebach used to say, they don't send the healthy people here. This is a hospital. So who comes to a hospital? The healthy people don't. Maybe they come to visit. Maybe the higher neshamas, they come down once in a while to see how we're doing. They do a bikur cholim. But everybody who's here is conflicted by definition. There's no other option. If you stop being conflicted, you've lost your humanity. And it's about everything. And you also have to own up to the fact that you make mistakes. And maybe it's not even a mistake. Maybe you did it on purpose. Now you regret it. So now you have to Rishayim Eleim Charatot. So you have to accept the fact that you're full of regret. And in many things that are wrong. And I'm sorry for them. So that's what it means to be a human being. Anybody who assumes that something else. So again, we talked about this last week. That becomes a type of delusion that you're sold. Everything's supposed to be okay. We don't even talk about it because nobody who's really smart believes that one. But it certainly exists out there, and certainly marketing tries to give you that, and they tell you the moment you buy this and that, right, your conflicts will be over and you'll live happily ever after. Or that whole line, happily ever after, whatever that means. It doesn't mean that you can't be happy. You can be very happy, but you have to accept the conflict and the dilemmas as part of being human. Okay. So, first of all, it's not kilayim because we need them both. But it's not kilayim because of something more.
Because it's part of nature.
Why is it part of nature? Divine is above nature.
Yeah, but I mean, Hashem created Adam with both. Together.
Okay, let's say that it's true.
The conflict.
Okay, so you're saying, so from the beginning, he created it this way.
Very interesting.
Okay, so to say that this is, and that's basically the answer that we just gave, which is that this is the nature of being a human being. Okay, but there's another reason why they're not really kilayim, why they're not really conflicted in such a way that if you have both, then it becomes improper. But I want to take it to another stage, which is, again, to go back into the Zohar and say that if you favor, the way we'll explain it now, that if you favor just one of them, either the divine soul or the animal soul, then what you'll end up with is that one of them will fall into the klipa. That's the idea. That you have to give both of them room, and in fact you also have to give the intellectual soul room. Now,
In what way do you give them room?
so we'll see in a second. So to explain what it means to give each one of them room, so we have to go back to a very foundational thing. That in Kabbalah, everything starts, every entity, whatever spiritual entity it is, so it could be my divine soul, my animal soul, whatever it is, it starts from the crown. From the crown. First there's the crown. And then everything else falls into place. But there has to first of all be a crown. Even in Malchut, which starts off as just a point, that point is a point of crown. What does it mean that it's a crown? It means that it's above the entity itself. Like the crown sits on top of my head. So it's never part of the actual entity, whatever this spiritual form is that we're creating. So when we talk about the divine soul, so we call it, that's where we learned it the most, we call it emunah. That it's faith, which is the highest part of the crown, that's sitting completely outside the system. What does it mean that it's sitting outside? So I'll say it in a way that will be very useful later on. For me to attach to my faith, to my crown, means, especially if I'm talking about my divine soul, but we see that it's also true about the animal soul and the intellectual soul. But in the divine soul, it's very clear. I have to be willing to place myself in the space where I'm not sure that I even exist. Meaning, it's such a feeling of there's nothing here except for God that there's no room for me to be certain of my own existence.
This is a way connected to the crown.
That's not just the crown, but the faith in the crown, the highest part of the crown.
That sounds like a Nefesh Elokis over Nefesh Elohim situation.
No, it just means to connect with what my faith of my divine soul is.
Right, but that's my divine soul.
Okay, that's what I said. This is the faith of the divine soul.
we are
the belief.
focusing on one over the other.
Okay, I'm saying, here we're just going to explain it in divine for a moment. The faith, people say faith, what does it mean faith? I have faith that everything will turn out okay. Very good, very nice. Will that include you or not? That's the question that needs to be asked. Everything will turn out okay. Are you going to be there or not? That I don't know. Faith is very, very powerful. It's all-encompassing to the point where it's not clear that I have room in it. It could be that I don't exist there. It's okay. Why? Because it will all turn out okay. So what does that mean? What about me? It's not about me.
Sounds like love, with me or without me. When you love someone,
Okay, something like that.
right?
But here it's even more than just regular love, like that's why you said child, that it's a feeling of essence, that I'm so essentially connected to God that whether I become a separate entity or not is not relevant. It's not important. It's just pure faith. And pure faith is so outside me that it can't even give me a place to stand. That's what it means that it's above me, it's outside of me. Everything else that I'll think about, my wisdom, my understanding, all these things, they validate in the end my existence because they're part of my existence. The more wise I become, the more space there is for me. What does the faith of the divine soul believe? What's its main belief?
God is good.
Don't.
God is everything. You know,
We've learned this a lot of times, so. What does it mean? So you said that God is everything, but there's another way that we say it that's more to the point. You said it like the way the Baal Shem Tov tried to explain it to people. Mm-hmm. But how do we say it? What's the epitome of Jewish faith? How do we say it? Shema Yisrael. Hashem Echad. That's already the explanation. But to say that Hashem is one, by one I don't mean, there's only, again, I prefer the laws of electromagnetics over the laws of gravity. Right? That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying there's this force and that force and forget about all the others. The only one that's right is this one. That's not God is one. That's just to say He's miyuchad, He's special. But to say that He's one, echad, not miyuchad, to say that He's yachid, that's already to say there is no other force except for Him. So what is all this that I see? So that's a question, how He lets this exist. But Hashem is one means there's only Hashem, period. That's all there is. So the Baal Shem Tov trying to explain it, he says, all is Hashem and Hashem is all. Okay. Akol Hashem, Hashem hu akol. Everything you see, that's Hashem. And everything
You don't see.
everything that you see is Hashem. And Hashem is everything that you see. Why does He need both sides of the equation? So that's for a different time. What is the main belief, the keter, the faith of the animal soul?
everything is me.
It's me.
That it's me. That's why they're so diametrically opposed. Okay? That I am one. There's only one me. And without me in the world, there's nothing. Yeah? That's what the animal soul, that's what it believes. Is that good or bad that it believes that? It depends what you do with it. The Berdichever explains that if a poor person comes to your door and you tell him Hashem is one, What do you want from me? Go to Hashem. He says, that's an avera, that's not okay. What should you do? At that moment, you have to be, in a certain sense, he calls it, it's the use of kfirah, of being a heretic. He says you have to be a heretic in Hashem's providence at that moment and say, there's only me. If I don't give him, that's his end. I'm the provider. So it depends. It's not that the ego in this sense, or this faith that the animal soul has, is wrong. It just has to be in the right context. That's what we meant, that you can't tell the person, give up on your ego entirely. Because if you do that, what will the ego do? It'll be repressed, and it'll come back with a vengeance. And when it comes back with a vengeance, what it'll do, what it'll end up doing, is it'll swallow you whole, and you will only become your ego. You see this in teenagers a lot. That they know, they hold themselves not to feel selfish, or not to do the wrong thing, and so on. But because they do it so totally, eventually they have to let go. There's no context. They're not feeling. They're not feeling this in a balanced way. The divine soul is not really taking the animal soul and leading it in the right direction. Rather, it's completely erasing it. And you can't completely erase it. So when it comes back, it has to come back eventually. They're overwhelmed by it. It could lead to also a type of schizophrenia. But the problem is that you didn't do the right thing for the animal soul. You didn't do something right for its belief. What does it mean to do something right for its belief? So that's why the Baal Shem Tov says that before you even dream about fulfilling yourself in your divine soul, of identifying with your divine soul, before you even think about that, you have to properly put in context your animal soul. What's properly putting it in context? That we call achna'ah, we call it submission. And really it says, you know what, the world really is about me. It is about me. Except what? That Hashem did everything. From the day I was born until now. Kol ha'olam lo nivra ela bishvili. It really was for me. Everything that he did for me. But for what? To give me a sense of humility, to give me a sense of lowliness. To understand that without Hashem holding my hand all the time, I really am nothing.
It really is a shilov of the two of them. You're not separating them out. When the poor person comes to your door, you're not using your entire Bahamas. You're using a shilov of the two.
Why?
Because I say, oh, here's a poor person. I'm the only person around. I have to give him money because Hashem gave me money.
Exactly. So you're putting
it's a mixture of the two.
Right. So you're putting the animal soul in context.
Yeah, but I'm using Nefesh Elokis to help.
Ken, that's what gives it the context.
Right. So, but when you say, is this a bad thing? Is this a good thing? It's impossible to use the Nefesh Elokis. Sometimes it's used by itself. The Nefesh Bahamas can never be used by itself.
So what we're going to say here is that even if the divine soul is used entirely by itself, that's also not a good thing. Why? Because the person begins to believe that he doesn't have an animal soul at all. He'll be overwhelmed when it comes back. That's exactly what I just described about the teenager. That he wants to do the right thing, but he becomes a martyr. In Hebrew we call it kadosh muneh. And if you're a kadosh muneh, if you're a martyr, then if God forbid, at any moment the animal soul comes back, it'll come back with a vengeance. That's not the idea. The idea is, first of all, to give it its due credit. What's its due credit? Really, the world is about you. You're right. In what sense? That everything that God did, He did in order so that you have the possibility of serving Him. Really, that's what the world is about. But right away, it's in context.
I know what you're saying, but when the Nefesh Bahamas is correct in its right state, it's in context, using the help of the Nefesh Elokis. When you gave the example of the Emunah and the Keter of the Nefesh Elokis, I need nothing from the Nefesh Bahamas in that moment. I could be in a whole state.
Right. No, it's true. It's true, 100%. But the moment that the animal soul comes back, I'm not overwhelmed. What's the only thing that it's good for? Once I'm identifying with my divine soul, it's good for reminding me not to feel superior to other people, because I too have an animal soul. That's all. I can't give up on the animal soul. Really, even if I don't remember it, I have to remember it. Meaning, even if the animal soul doesn't come back for some reason, I have to remember it. So really, what's the teenager missing? He's missing the ability to balance it in such a way that okay, you did something very important and good, and you held yourself, and you refrained from something, and so on. And then if the next moment you want reward for it, what are you supposed to do with that feeling? Say, you see, and still, despite the fact that I did something that was very holy, what does it mean holy? It's only for the sake of Hashem, I still want a reward for it. So what am I supposed to feel? I shouldn't feel superior about having done something so high and good. It's really a good thing that you did. But right away you want the reward. So I see that I want the reward, that's where I need to, it came back to remind me of my lowliness. Right, that I can't say to somebody else, but look at all the mitzvot that I'm doing. I can't say that. Why? Because in the end I see that my animal soul still wants a reward. So I'm not doing it for its own sake. So it's not that the animal soul saying, really in Hebrew it's called kochi ve'otzim yadi. It's not that the animal soul saying that it's all about me, I've done everything, everything that you see here is mine. It's not that that's wrong, it's just that it has to be put in the right context. And the right context is, yes, everything that Hashem has done, He's done because of you. You are the center of attention here. But for what purpose? So that you can serve Hashem. So that you can give the credit back to Hashem. You're right, you are very important. So the right order in that sense is, that first we say, Ein od milvado. First we have to say, we mentioned this last class, so I thought it would be a good idea to explain the order here. The first you have to acknowledge that there's nothing but Hashem. But if there's nothing but Hashem, how come I exist? Says the animal soul. You exist to serve Hashem. That's what you're here for. And that's the hardest thing for most people to get over. Because right away they're reminded of something that they don't want to be reminded of, which is that you have no real control over reality. That in the end, Hashem is the Baal Bait, and not you. Okay. What does the intellectual soul believe in? What is its faith? What is its crown?
Your own power.
Sorry?
Your own power. The I.
That's the animal soul.
Outside the intellectual soul.
The intellectual soul.
It's also the power of what I know and what I believe.
Meaning, okay, so say it better. The power of the intellect.
Indeed.
That in the end, the faith of the crown of the intellect is that we can solve all our problems. Maybe we haven't done it yet, but if we pursue the path of logic and rationality and all that, we will achieve a utopia in reality. That's what it believes in. Not just the lawyers and the doctors. You know what? Lawyers, I don't think believe that. A long time ago, they figured out that the evil is too great, that no amount of rationality will ever. Scientists believe that. Scientists have this belief that it's just a question of how much we'll figure out. As we figure out more and more, there's a lot to know here, and the more we figure it out, the better we'll be able to govern society and everything. Plato was like that. Philosophers believe that.
All of us sit and say, okay, let me just figure this problem out, and and everything will be fine. Every day.
So that's its belief. It's belief in the intellect, in the belief in rationality and in logic. And like I told you a few weeks ago, I repeat it every once in a while just to remind myself. I grew up like that. So it's very hard to me to give up that faith. But there's nothing wrong with it per se. As long as you also put it in context. What's the right context for that faith?
That Hashem gives us the information that we need to have in order to figure it out. That what I the choice comes from Hashem. The decision in the end is He's going to give us the information.
So you're very close, but it's related to the parsha we just read.
All knowledge is from God.
So all knowledge that's good, but it's not yet the pintlach.
So what's the mixture?
What are we looking for? We're looking for you're right, but it's not just any knowledge. You're right, but it's not logic the way you would assume, maybe symbolic logic that you learn in the university.
So you're speaking about Torah knowledge.
Right, exactly. That there is such a thing, and you should pursue it, and that's where you'll get all the ways to. That's how you solve problems, really. But it's called Torah. So it's not the human intellect by itself. It's the human intellect pursuing a God-given Torah. And the God-given Torah is not necessarily rational. It's very complex. There's many modes of thinking in it. And there's people who like to argue that no, the moment that the human intellect has been shown to be better when it's rational, so therefore that's the only way to learn Torah. That's not true. Because there are certain things that it's better not to be rational. Which is like something that we're figuring out today in game theory, for instance. That the best way sometimes to win a game, to win a conflict, a dilemma, is to act irrationally. And the moment that you act irrationally, you do the thing that's not expected, because you did it, okay, then you can win. But if you try to play it rationally, you can't win. It becomes a zero-sum game. It's not always true that following rationality is what makes things better. But following Torah does. If you use the human intellect in all its varieties, with Torah, then the intellectual soul's faith in the mind is vindicated. And it's true. That's exactly what. So if the faith in the divine soul is faith in one God, and the faith in the intellectual soul is faith in the Torah, that's how you rectify it, that's how you fix it. So how do you really fix faith of the animal soul? What do you have to do to it? Because maybe you can't always go through the whole process of Achnav Dalam Dakar right away. Maybe you can't do the whole thing it takes. How do I right now at this moment give somebody a way to right away fix the faith of the animal soul? So the answer is simple. If the first one is God and the second one is Torah, so the third one has to be Am Yisrael. Right? That's what the Zohar says. It's 3 knots that are connected one to another. Kutchabrichu, Ve'oraita, Ve'Yisrael. Really, the Zohar says Yisrael, Ve'oraita, Ve'Kutchabrichu. It goes from below to above. So, in English it's God and the Torah and the Jewish people. So the real faith of the animal soul, if I want to fix it right away on the spot, at this moment, is that I don't have to believe in me, I have to believe in every other Jew. That right away fixes it. It also fixes it in many more ways, because at that moment I don't let the ego take over in terms of me. But what I have to believe is, if I can believe this about myself, right, that I am everything, so I have to be able to believe that about every other Jew also, that he is everything, or she is everything. That's the total rectification of the animal soul. So when we're in therapy, the main thing that we always encounter, you could say, is that it's very clear that the person's faith is misplaced in some way. Meaning, the most common one is, of course, that the person is believing in himself completely. That his faith is entirely the faith of the animal soul. Because we're dealing here with crowns, and we said that every entity starts in the crown and then it develops from there, if you have this faith in yourself, you'll eventually develop all of the parts of this partzuf, all the parts of this entity. So if you have this faith in yourself, that I'm everything, so eventually you'll have a chokhmah, and you'll have a bina, and you'll have a chesed and gvura and tiferet. Everything will come out of it. You'll become a whole persona. The whole persona, really, what does the child have? The child just has the feeling that I'm everything. That's all. And maturing means that they begin to grow an intellect, and then they grow emotions, and then they grow everything. Everything needs to be there. It's a whole complex that's complete. There's nothing missing in it, and that's why you can go through all of your life and never feel that there's anything missing, because it grows all the parts. But the same thing is true when you discover the intellect. A scientist can come and say, because I have faith in the intellect, so that also gives me, meaning I have faith in rationality, I have faith in this knowledge that we're going to discover, so I can come and build an intellect, I can build emotions based on it. I can even build habits based. Everything is orderly, everything is in place, everything is rational. And we know people like that. And everybody knows people like that. For whom science has taken over, knowledge is taken over, intellect is taken over. And everything that comes out of it, even the emotions, are entirely rational. Meaning, it's also a question whether you can get excited. You can only get excited if there's new knowledge discovered, maybe. But if you don't give me anything new, okay, if my child just, is happy for some reason taking a bath, so unless I can find something new in it, who knows if I can even get excited. Because everything is now governed by the rational. What would happen if I was entirely my divine soul? So the only things that would move me entirely are only divine things, nothing else. Also, it builds the whole. But I need all three of them. In order to really function as a human being, I need all three. And they're conflicted, it's true. They're completely in conflict all the time. But that's why they're not really mixing. Because each one is a full entity in and of itself. So you could say on the one hand that God created us this way, so that's what makes it natural. You can say on the other hand that because they're so complete, they don't really ever completely mix even. When do they mix? When one of them is weaker. And when one of them is weaker in some sense, so it might be that it falls down into the klipot because of this. So for instance, when faith in the divine soul is weak, and I don't know that it's just Hashem is one, so it falls into the klipot, it becomes superstition. The people start believing in all kinds of nonsense that has nothing to do with Hashem as one, because it's weak. So I mixed them together with, for instance, that there's a lot of this in the world. We know that there's a whole organization that lives off of this, it preys off of this, that people want to succeed. Really, they're working with their animal soul. And so I tell them, oh, you want to succeed? Here, I'm going to give you a whole toolbox that came from where? From either the intellectual soul based on Torah, or even if it's the divine soul. But its purpose in both cases is to serve you. So either the Torah is going to serve you, or Hashem is going to serve you. And then you get all these superstitions. If I do some trick, then Hashem will help me. And if I do some trick, that it's written in the Torah that you do so and so, so that'll help me.
Because you don't transform yourself. You just...
Because really they're very weak. The Torah there is very weak, and the divine is very weak. They're not strong in and of themselves. What?
The divine soul is
Of course.
an ineffable part of God.
Can, and yet, in this week's Torah Or, we just read that when a person doesn't use his divine soul, it becomes weak. Chalishut, he calls it. That's what he calls it.
And yet it's physical coming
Nachon. But in you, the way it manifests in you is weak, and the link is weak, and so it doesn't come into play in your life. But now, what I want to see is something even a little bit more than this. We said that the intellectual soul is about belief in science. But there's actually something that's more common today, which is a different belief altogether. And you can say that this is really how the intellectual soul appears today. That there's not very many people, in the end, that are scientific, that really know what they're talking about. And so there's not really very many hardcore intellectual soul people. But if that was the case, so the intellectual soul wouldn't be so important. One of the interesting things that Freud did is that we said before, the intellectual soul is like the superego. So he didn't call the superego that it's the intellectual per se. It's not scientific. Rather, what did he call it? He called it the cultural. Meaning, what are the cultural norms? The way that people live with each other. That's really what the superego is. That in the end it's teaching you how to fit in. Into what? Not into yourself, because that would be like the ego itself. But it's teaching you how to fit into society. So then it becomes that the intellectual soul really today, and that's why if we don't say this, then you can miss it in people. You cannot understand what you're dealing with, is cultural norms. It's what it means to fit in. It's like to, what they call, what's the word with a C? I'm trying to find it. Conforming, thank you. How to conform, basically. So for instance, to conform means that it would be impossible today to change, let's say, the legal system in Israel. Why? Because the cultural norms are such that the High Court, the Supreme Court, has to be right. Even if they're not, they're right. The cultural norms are that the press, even if it's biased, is still completely necessary. You have to have. If you didn't have it, then democracy would be dead. It's like a cultural norm. It's like intellect says this is logical. There's no other way you can do it. And if you ever try any other way, God forbid, you're going to ruin everything. But it's also true about smaller things. So, for instance, we have this norm that says that you're supposed to be healthy and happy. That's what you need to look like. And if you, God forbid, are anything else, then you have to hide it. You can't allow, otherwise you're not conforming. And so that's why people come to psychologists, because they want somebody that they can at least trust to tell them, I'm not so happy and I'm not so healthy. What? Okay. So what's the role of the psychologist in this case? To tell them, look, the real happiness is not whether you conform to what society is going to ask from you. Conforming to society is an intellectual exercise. It's very important, but it's not the main thing. Real rectification is, do you conform to what the Torah is telling you to do? That's the real conformity. And until you begin to work on that scale of looking at that as conforming, so you're really stuck. There's no easy way that you can have happiness. There's no easy way to stay healthy. Is that a downer? It looks a little like It's saying that you have to be a little nonconformist with society. You can't be entirely outside. That's not, even though the Rambam says, if society is so terrible that you can't live in it, that everything, all the morals are upside down, and like in Sodom, but only like in Sodom, I guess, then you have to go live in the desert. You can't go into such a metropolis. But as long as it's not that, you have to conform at some level. You have to be part of it at some level, because that's what it means. How else are you going to do tzedakah if you don't have a home? By the way, this is already a good opportunity to mention something that happened to me some time ago. You should know that there are people like this. There's a person whose parents are really, really worried about him because he's 28, right? And in the frum world, if you're not married already and don't have 2 kids, so there's something wrong with you. There's got to be something wrong. Not only that, he doesn't even want to go out on dates. So what is he? Is he a homosexual? What's wrong with him? Right away, that's like a thought. Worse than that, God forbid, he learns all day. His parents know that that's what he does, but never in the same place. Meaning they know that every day or two, he goes somewhere else. And more than that, when it comes to being at home, he almost never sees them. He leaves really early, and he comes back very late. So what is he, into drugs? But they know he's learning, so it doesn't work. So something's off here. So it's completely off. So what is this person suffering from? Is it maybe he needs a lot of help? How do you get him to conform now and to decide? Because that's what the parents want. They want him to conform. But they want him to meet what society expects from him, because otherwise how is he going to be a human being? And so does anybody know if somebody was like that?
Well, exactly. The Torah asks you also to get married.
To get married, right?
It's not only society.
His parents are just framing it wrong.
Meaning?
To be a little smarter, and said the Torah wants you to get married. Maybe
No,
I don't know, right? That's what you're saying.
It might help. It might
You have
help.
to conform to Torah.
It might help.
It's going to work. I'm just saying.
It might help.
That's, I guess, what's missing here, according to what we're saying. I don't know.
My first question is he suffering?
So the first question is, she says, is he happy or not?
Okay.
What if he's happy? Meaning not happy just in the sense that he feels that he's doing his avodat Hashem. The Torah says you have to get married. It doesn't force me to get married. It's not like it says, if you haven't found a wife by the age of 24, you have to marry the first thing that comes out the next door. It's not true. Maybe she won't want to. And also, why would she want to? There's no such thing as by this and this age you have to get married. It's true, after 24 we say Zovera Vera and so on. But why do we say that? Because we assume that it can't be that he's single and not doing things he shouldn't be doing. But what if he isn't doing anything he shouldn't be doing? There's a small percentage of people in the world that really don't fit.
Sure.
They really don't fit. The only thing you can do is you can daven for them, that somehow they'll be able to get married. The reason I'm saying all this is because I knew somebody like this who did get married. Not only did he get married, he had 10 children. But his wife confided in me a long time ago, and she said, every day is hell. Not because he's a bad person. He's great. She loves him crazily. But she doesn't know if it'll last the day. She doesn't know if she was able to convince him, using Torah, that we should get married. But she doesn't know, and the love is very passionate, all the time. No, she doesn't. She's not talking about whether I'll be alive, whether he'll be able to stick it out another day. Because for him, even though he may love his wife tremendously and he loves his children, but there's something about these people, there are a small percentage but there are such people that it's a complete sacrifice for him to enter into society. But you know what? Because he's like that, he's able to do things that other people can't. He's a nonconformist, so he's never afraid to act completely outside of what people think is okay and not okay. And he does great things because of that.
But say somebody like that never gets to that point of conforming to what the Torah says.
Right. In that mitzvah. But in other things, for instance, our society says you can't daven all day long, right? That doesn't work. But in his world, it could very much well be what he does. You have to be aware.
Here's an example of it. The conformity that the Torah is asking of you. What is the wiggle room for me not to conform to everything Torah asks if I feel like I won't survive it? How much can I say I just can't survive what the Torah is demanding of me? But it's conformity to Torah, not to anything else. Do you know what I'm saying? Is that just self? Is that something God understands?
That's what he's doing.
Like I said, you're full of conflict. There's no simple solution to it.
Right, but I'm saying, is this just like a you do your best kind of thing, or is it you're actually meant to?
No, you have to see.
Struggle that you can't breathe.
Right, the people, these people, what is clear about them, for instance, like the Torah says about Ben Zoma, that he didn't get married. Ben Azai, sorry, he didn't get married. Why didn't he get married? Because he wanted to learn. So if I get married, I can't learn. So what do you see about these people? That every moment is spent doing something. It's not like he's just sitting on the porch watching the cars go by. That's not what he's doing. He's really dedicated to some part of it. Because he's so dedicated to it, I think there's no room for something else. But it's not because, I'm trying to say, it's not because he's too, you tell him, look, you're learning too much, you really have to give more time to other things. No. His nature is to not conform. His nature is to be out there. And because a lot of these people, you can see them. They're not so difficult to find.
My father,
okay,
I grew up with this exactly. Every day we didn't know if it was the last day until the end of the day. And then one day he just went off to do his thing, and all he does is for the zulat. He doesn't do for the family. He does for the zulat. His mission in life is for
other people,
the whole and other people.
Okay, so there's people like that. There's people that do it for Torah. There's people who do it, but the idea here being that because this is a keter, because this is like a whole faith that you have, that if I just follow Torah, everything will be fine, okay, and everything will come to its a good end. So they can't follow the conformity of society. It's hard for them. Again, they're conforming to Torah the way they understand. They're very idealistic.
One part of it.
Meaning you'll settle, because
He was married, but
so, but he was. The question is, to what part of Torah was he dedicated to before he started learning? Well, Ken. How did he know what Torah says if he didn't learn?
No, I'm talking about
once he learned. Once he
He
learned.
got married, but he didn't live with his wife. He really went.
Ken, he didn't have any children.
No, they did. She stayed with the child.
Ken, there's reason to believe that Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha was his son, but it's not that he was called Korcha. He was called the Kireach, the one the bald-headed. I guess most people had hair back then. In any case, this is I said this as a side note, just to know that you can't always say that for somebody to conform is really the solution. It could be that he's one of these fringe liars, like he lies on the fringe. What I started saying is you'll usually see these people, it's not that they can't hold a job, they hold a job very easily, but it has to be a job where nobody tells them what to do. Where do you see such a job? Very easy. What?
Shepherd.
Either shepherd or the modern day shepherd. Instead, a shepherd used to tend to the flocks.
Yeah.
What do they do today?
To a sect.
They tend to a construction site.
Oh.
They're shomrim. That's what they do. Most of them, because they have to eat, they're not going to steal. They're very idealistic. What?
You can do whatever you want at the construction.
Yeah, you can.
I feel like
As long as nobody is bothering you, and you can read your book, and you can think your thoughts, and not be bothered by what everybody else thinks you need. Shamel, you're not working in construction. You're the guy who's there from 5 o'clock until the next morning at 7. That's what they do, almost all of them. They end up being shomrim somewhere. There's these night watchmen. And really, what are they allowing themselves to do? To be nonconformists. They're allowing themselves to live their lives next to society. And if you try to push somebody like that into conformity, you'll break them. But they can do it to themselves. Like this example that I just gave, this one who did get married, and had 10 children. Where did he get this idea that he had to get married? So he got it from Torah. There was no other way that if he would have remained, it was also about tshuva. If he would have remained not from, he would have happily spent his life never getting married. It was very clear. He didn't need it. But once he decided that this is something that needs to be done, he was willing to be convinced by somebody. But in his nature, all the time he felt like, I can't, I don't know if I can do another day. But he did. Until his last day, he did.
So this is why all our forefathers were shepherds?
Okay, they're all nonconformists.
Right?
So now you brought up something very important. That to strengthen the point of faith in each one of these psyches, in the divine psyche, the animal psyche, and the intellectual psyche, you have to be willing to go outside the whole system. So we said that when it comes to the divine soul, it means there's only Hashem, and nothing of me remains even nothing of myself. I can't vouch for my existence. But the same thing is true in science or in culture. What does it mean to go to the point of faith in myself? I have to go to where the intellect starts, and all my present knowledge I can't vouch for. I have to be willing to doubt all of it. And to say that maybe there's something in the higher realms that is so revealing, so new, that the moment that it will be revealed, all my present knowledge will either become a footnote or become completely wrong. But it's nothing compared to what there is above. What about What about the animal soul? So that's really what it means to have faith in another Jew. Because it's to say that what's beyond me might be infinitely more than what I am. That somebody else here is infinitely more than what I am. It might be that even next to him, I don't really take up any space. I can't vouch for my existence next to this other person. And so if you really want to build a healthy relationship with somebody else, you have to believe that. That's what it means to believe in another Jew. The Baal Shem used to say there are two beliefs. You have to believe in Hashem, you have to believe in every Jew. So what does it mean to believe in another Jew, to believe in another person? It's to believe that they are infinitely more than what I am. And that's the you say that's the rectification of the animal soul, to have true lowliness. How could it be that Moshe Rabbeinu believes in every Jew? He says he's the Anav, he's more humble than every other person that ever walked the face of the earth. Because that's what he feels. That if he removes, if he goes to the end, to the crown of what it means to have an animal soul, and rectifies it, then his feeling is overwhelmingly that whatever else is here is more than what I am. So certainly if somebody's standing in a store or they have to give service to other people, if they want the service to be good, what does it mean to serve somebody else? So it has to be that I believe at some level that the person in front of me is infinitely more than I am. Otherwise, how can you serve? Otherwise, you're constantly being, if you want, you're constantly being humiliated. Okay? You can either be humble or be humiliated. Those are two options. If you understand that really what's outside of me is much, much more than what's inside, then I'm not humiliated anymore. I'm humbled. Okay, now it's in vogue for all the politicians to say I'm humbled by your choosing me, by your electing me. That's what they're supposed to say. Because my only purpose is to serve you. So I don't want to get into too much politics, but when the last few times I looked at Trump, I really saw a narcissist, and he's in for the wake up of his life. It could be that if somebody explains this to him, or the job will explain it to him in the right way, they could be the biggest servant ever. It could be. But because it's always this way that Hashem opens an opening only when you come to a place that the opening will mean something. Meaning it has to be, when suddenly you see yourself in the right light, it's because it has a real impact on you. Meaning you've come to some conflict that really can't be solved. And then you look at yourself and you're like, wow, wait a minute. One just mentioned that this is the pattern that you see all the time. That people come broken, and the hardest thing, or the most important and the hardest thing to do, is to convince them that the fact that this broke you and it opened you up and you're looking inside, it's an opening. It's not a break. It's Hashem opening a window into yourself. Meaning you come to such conflict and it hurts you so bad that suddenly you have no choice but to say things about yourself that you've never said, and that's an opening. It's an opening into a whole new life when that happens. That breakdown is not a breakdown at all. It's an opening. And you have to use it. You have to continue using it. Don't give up on it. Because Hashem wants you to, that's why He gave it to you in the first place. He opened the window into yourself so you could use it.
Becoming a butterfly or getting out of an egg.
But here it's not an egg. You don't feel, there's no feeling that something is being born. You feel on the contrary that I've hit rock bottom, and the only thing I can do is doubt myself. I said, that's it. That moment that you begin to doubt yourself, that's exactly the moment that you reach the keter of whatever soul you're working with. And now you can rebuild everything from that point on.
How do you get humiliated by being in front of somebody that's not, that you're not humble? What's the opposite?
Because let's say you're working as a teller in let's say even worse things. The worst is, I think one of the worst things I can imagine is doctors and my nephew joined a little bit. He's a he's a counselor for an embassy in the United States. Yeah. So what does he? He gives counselor services. To who does he give it to? Who do doctors have to treat? Okay. So sometimes it's a very important professor, and they're very happy. They finally have somebody on my stature. But most of the time, who are they serving? Who they consider to be idiots, who got shot, right? Who are in some gang and they got shot, or a terrorist and he got shot. And so now he has to take all who he is, and he's a very upright and cultured and knowledgeable and logical and so on type of person, and he has to stoop all the way down to mamash clean this person's tuchus. That's what it's like. He's like he completely stoops down to. So it's humiliating. It's pashut humiliating. You've got this person who doesn't care the least bit about his life, getting into trouble, and now the doctor has to come, a person who cares all about life, and he has to stoop down to this level to deal with him. So it's humiliating. But even if it's just in a store, it could be that the manager has to deal with who? The nice customers, normal customers, the manager never sees. Who does he have to see? The people are the mishubayim, the ones who can't get along with the regular teller or whatever it is. Yeah, so the manager has to take care of it. So he's humiliated, he's taken down. The same thing as somebody once, when he slipped a note under the Rebbe's door. So afterwards, they said that they told the Rebbe they were sorry. So he asked why. So they said because I made the Rebbe stoop down. So the Rebbe said, "That's my job." How does he say it's not that he said to them? But how does he really feel? He doesn't feel humiliated. He feels humbled. He's humble anyway. So for him to stoop down, and in the same way that parents do for their children. Why am I doing this? Why am I cleaning his tuchas? Why I take out everything that needs to be taken out? Why? Because I'm not humiliated by it. There are people who are humiliated by it, so they won't do it. But if you understand, and that's sort of like what you're supposed to encounter, that there's infinity here in this other person, so it doesn't matter really if it's your child or somebody else, just with your children you're expected to, so you do it. But the truth is, you can do it for anybody. Because the Zulat is much more than I am. The other might be infinitely more. Not just might be, he is infinite. That's what it means to believe in somebody else. I believe in him. And even in the places where it's very hard for me to believe in them, I believe. Okay. So, let's finish with one last thought. That there has to be inter-inclusion between them. Because there's 3 souls, and each one has its faith, so they have to have some kind of connection between them. So what would be the divine? Let's start with the divine. So there has to be an intellect in the divine, and there has to be an animal in the divine. It's like the faith of each one has to appear in all three of them. That's what it means, that tlat ksharin mitkashrin da b'da v'da v'da, right? Da b'da v'da. That they have to connect to one another fully. So it means that whatever the faith is in each of them, it appears in some way in all three, right? So in the divine soul, we said it's believed that Hashem is one. So how does the intellect appear in the divine? The intellect's belief is in the Torah. So how does the Torah appear in the divine? So we said that Hashem and the Torah, the easiest thing is just to say that they're one. Yeah? So everywhere we can just say it's one and one and one. But we'll see in a moment that that's good for the divine, for the intellectual soul, and for the animal soul it won't work so easily. What about the Israel? So we say Israel v'kutchabrichu one. So we say they're just one. Let's leave it for a moment. What that means. What about in the intellectual soul? So we said that there the faith is faith in what? In the Torah.
The divine, wait, which one are you doing
Now we're doing the divine in the intellectual. So it's more than that. It's the keter. It has to be the keter. So it's like the keter of the keter would be. So that's the simple faith that we have, that the Torah is divine. What do we mean by that it's divine? That it's infinite. Meaning that even though I was given a book that I can throw at you and it's finite, and here it is, that still in its essence it's infinite. So as much as I've learned, it doesn't matter how much I've learned, it's still infinite. And this is why is this so important? Because people get stuck on the idea that that it's really a race to see who finishes first. Who finishes learning the entire Torah first? And there's no idea that, or there is an idea. After a while, you have to figure this out. That it doesn't matter how much you learn; it's still infinitely vast. It has no end to it. So really, the feeling that I have towards it is that in its keter, it's infinite. It'll always continue on. What would be the Torah of the Torah? How would the intellect appear? An intellectual root in the Torah itself. So there I would say that even though it's infinite, right? The same thing as what a scientist does when he goes into the laboratory. He says, I know that they may find in 100 years that everything I'm doing is wrong. Okay? But I'm still doing it. Why? Because I have faith in the mind. So in the Torah, I don't believe that what they'll find in 100 years will make what I say wrong. But even though it's infinitely vast, you have to learn today. That's what Chazal say, that even though the Torah is infinite, you still have a requirement to learn today. It makes no difference. Because the exercise is in the learning itself. And then what would be the animal part, or like the animal soul within the intellectual soul, within the Torah? So it would mean that every Jew can teach me Torah. Right? Like Shlomo HaMelech, Chacham mikol adam. That if it's true that everybody is infinite, that I believe in every Jew, so what do I believe? I believe also that he can teach me. What is this a feeling like? That it doesn't matter. So before, like you have to, instead of being humiliated, you have to be humbled. So a lot of times, because you think you know a lot, you're sitting with somebody like a little child, and he begins to say something. And you're like, what could he possibly say that? He says, that's because you don't believe in him. Chacham mikol adam says that he completely believes in every single Jew. Every single Jew has a portion in the Torah. So listen carefully to what he's saying. It might be that he doesn't know your language, because you've learned a lot more. You'll have to translate it. But if you're really chacham, if you really understand what's going on here, so anything that somebody tells you in Torah is real. You just have to figure it out. It's an insight that you would not be able to come to without this other individual. He completes you. Okay, now going to the animal soul. So the divine in the animal soul, we already said. What does that mean? I mean, the emunah here is that every Jew is more than me. It could be that he's more divine. He's more an expression of the divine than I am. What about the intellect in the other person?
It goes the same way.
So it's
the animal and the divine is the same as the divine and the animal?
No, it should be different.
Right.
No. What did we say about we said that every Jew is divine, but we didn't say he's more than me. In the animal and the divine, we just said they're one, meaning that he's divine. We didn't define it, we sort of left it. But it has to be different, because it's the animal in the divine in the animal. So what does this mean, really? The divine in the animal. So we said that he's more than me. To what extent? How far does this go? It's called the lamed zchut. That even if it seems to me that there's no way that what he's doing is okay, to believe that there is divine here is to say, like the Ishbitzer used to say, that eventually it will be shown that no Jew ever sinned. There was never such a thing.
That's a dare.
Okay. So you have to lelamed zchut that in some way this is right. I can't see it, because that's exactly the point. I can't see it. That is the divine, so it's beyond me. It's beyond maybe it nullifies my existence to be able to see this.
Something that's so wrong.
Nachon, but that's exactly the point. That in order to be able to do this, I have to go to the keter here of my own animal soul, which leaves me with very little room for really myself. It's just him. So it's not how it affected me. There's something about how he did this or what he did that lelamed zchut means that it did serve a purpose. And at that moment, how do Chazal say it? So Chazal say, almost. Okay, how are you melamed zchut? That you say that really, even if he did something negative to me, harbe shluchim lamakom. That the fact there's many emissaries for Hashem has many emissaries. I was deserving of the thing that I see that's negative. But he, in and of himself, he is Hashem's shaliach. Even if he's a shaliach to do something that was negative to me, he's still a shaliach. He's battled to Hashem.
What did you just do? Intellect and what?
So this was the divine in the animal soul.
What about if you see something actually that goes against Torah that the other one does? Like
That's the Ishbitzel, that no Jew ever sinned, no matter what.
But you sort of say only two.
I'll say it another way. Let's say it mamash in examples that you see. Ever since I've started working with Facebook, I see it every single day. You see people criticizing what other Jews are doing, and theoretically they're well-meaning, because why? Because they say if he acts this way, it's against all of us, right? It reflects poorly on all of us. But that's the number one thing that I can if there's a way that I can tell him. The Torah says only if you're equal to him entirely are you allowed to even criticize him to him one-on-one. Lo chiach. It's only to somebody who you know is exactly like you, who knows what I know. We learned in the same place. He knows the same thing. If he doesn't, if he's not from the same base medrash, he's not from the same level of learning, the level, economical level, all these things. If he's not, you don't have a right to criticize him.
But you still think he may be better than you.
That's for sure. He's more a reflection. Right, we said that he's more a reflection of godliness than I am, okay? Because I know why I do things. In the other person, I don't. For instance, I don't know if anybody else here has an ego. I don't know. That's the first question of cognitive sciences. How do I know that anybody else is conscious? How do I know that you're not all just animals, acting on your pure instincts? What? Or just angels. I wouldn't know. I couldn't. There's no way I can tell the difference. There's a lot of philosophy goes into this. How can you tell that somebody else is as conscious as you are? It's very hard to know. There's all kinds of tests that they try to do. For instance, do they self-reflect? Meaning, can they tell you something about themselves? Whether these things are good enough or not, I don't know. But in any case, the bottom line is that when you see another Jew doing something that you think is wrong, the last thing that you can do is to say that it's wrong. That's what it means to believe. That it's so difficult. The lamed zchut is so hard to because right away, what do you mean? But you're hurting all of us. You're hurting me. You're hurting. That.
It's like the story of, don't get into details publicly, but what I told you last week. You're telling me if someone comes to you with something that they're doing that isn't whatever.
If they come to ask me, that's something else.
No, don't come to ask them to tell me that I have a responsibility maybe.
So I don't have to agree. I don't have to agree. My limud zchut is I don't kill them on the spot. What do you mean? Because I don't rebuke them. I don't rebuke them. I don't rebuke them. I don't rebuke them. First of all,
someone comes and tells me they're marrying a non-Jew. Can I just be
so even then, you're a melamed zchut. Why? Because he has no learning. He doesn't understand. It's not that this is an evil person. It's not that maybe you're not the right person to help them. It could be that you are. It could be that you're not. Depending on the situation.
Why would helping them contradict being
of course you try to do something.
On the contrary,
on some level,
if he's evil, how can I even get to him? Leochiach, it says hocheach tochiach, and the word in the middle of the two words is hocheach. So the first and last letter, hey and chet, they're equal to ava. And in tochiach, no, it's only in hochach. Hochach tochiach afilu pa'amim הרבה. What's the limud? And inside is the Shem, the kaf vav. There's ava on the outside, and inside there's a devotion to Hashem. That's hochacha. Right? Hochach. Hey vav chaf chet. So there has to be love involved in this. If I don't love the person, and why would I love them if I think that they're an evil person?
If I go to this ketchup place of limud zchut, I wouldn't even tamper with what they're doing.
No, limud zchut doesn't mean that he can't do anything wrong. It just means that he's not an evil person. He's not doing. And in the future, it will be revealed that really he never ever did anything wrong.
So
but that's in the future.
Just let it be.
So,
do you know what I'm saying? Like, there's an element of
right? I agree. Hocheach tochiach means, and mi she'imcha, hocheach tochiach et amitecha, he says in the Gemara, et asher imcha b'torah u'mitzvot. The one who is equal to you in Torah and mitzvot. If he's not equal to you, who said you can rebuke? If he comes to me, it's a different story. He comes to me and says, "Is this okay or not?" I said, "No." What about? It says that the leaders of the generation are caught in the sins of the generation. Because if you're a leader, it's a different capacity. But I, as an individual, that's why I said it appears on Facebook a lot, because suddenly everybody's a leader of the generation. Everybody has an audience. Everybody has a bama, as we say. They have a stage to voice everything they want on. And suddenly it becomes that they're a leader. They suddenly take on this position. And so now he has to rebuke everybody. Everything that doesn't look right to him. So right away, the only thing he can say is something negative. It's not the right way. Again, it's to feel that there is an infinity, an infinite divinity in every single Jew. So
something is a little confusing. someone, I don't want to say which does something in the area which looks wrong, I mean, even going away for the Torah or something, it hurts you, not because you want to rebuke him, not at all, but it hurts you because he's a Jew. And he's like you, and you would love him to come closer or something. Wouldn't you help? Wouldn't you try to...
Yeah, but you're not rebuking.
No, rebuke him, of course not.
On the contrary, you're loving. What am I loving? I'm loving the infinity in him. What am I loving in the first place? What do I mean I want him to come closer? Why? Because I see this tremendous potential, and it's going to waste. Because I see so much divinity, and it's not realizing itself.
And what
You have
about,
to be out of love.
Okay?
and what about in a situation of a bullying situation? When you see actually somebody hurting another, you must step up.
Settle. You must, and you also understand.
Maybe rebuke.
Settle, but it's to stop
And you
it.
have to do it out of love.
And you have
That's
to
the
do it
thing.
with love, and you
Okay?
try not to do it out of, you're a wonderful person, it's
No,
not something
you don't always have to say what you feel. It may be it may be contradictory to the result you want. To tell somebody, again, you never did anything wrong, but don't keep doing this, is very contradictory. I really have to come from believing that he's just as much a divine soul as I am.
So she's
Otherwise-
a wonderful person. She didn't say he's nothing
I'm
wrong.
saying, how would you
You're a good
handle that
person.
situation?
The good person is not what I'm saying.
No, that's what she said.
No, what I'm saying is, okay, you come to the person who's punching another Jew
Okay?
with words, with fists, but in a different way, right? And you say, I know you're a wonderful person, and this is not something that fits what good
Something
people
like
do.
that.
So something like that, just change it.
Whether if
with
it helps,
with
if it
some
helps,
love.
if it helps.
But that's,
The-
that
the-
still needs to be handled.
That's why, by the way, that when it comes to certain areas, the firm world is terrible. It doesn't know how to put its foot down. Okay?
Like the whole-
They err on the side of having faith in people, and and a lot of times the victims cry out, "What about us? We're also people." So you have to be very careful that you see both sides. It can't be that you, because you believe in somebody's being a Jew, it doesn't mean that you can allow them to hurt somebody else.
Right.
That has to be very clear. I don't give you, but even once you've hurt them, this is, by the way, this is one thing that you can't do in front of the victim. Mamish, never do it in front of the victim. But the other side also deserves to be able to do tshuva. If you do it in front of the victim, they'll only want more vengeance. And so this is something that has to be kept away from. They don't need to know about it. But at some level, you have to return to the instigator and to offer him the chance to do tshuva. To say, you're not outside the humanity. You're not a monster. You acted like a monster, but you're not a monster.
Exactly.
Your actions, again, you have to, the actions, and that thing is very fragile ground to walk on. You see that the authorities usually err on the other side, which is because you acted this way, automatically you're also a monster, and therefore from now on you're not a human being as far as we're concerned. Right? Even amongst the criminals in jail, so the worst are child molesters. That they're not human beings at all. The actions they did are inhuman. There's no question. The question is, what do you do afterwards? How do you separate? Because that's exactly what tshuva has to do. It has to separate somehow the evil out. If you don't offer a chance for there to be anything good, so how could the evil separate? The person won't be left with anything. Okay? And it's very delicate work. It's not for everybody. Again, here's another issue that doesn't exist. That people, because of their fear, so from now on, anybody who's, you're right, you should protect yourself. How do you protect yourself? First of all, you teach your children. We talked about this last week. That things are not as they seem. They have to know that. By age 7, or from age 7 and on, they have to begin to understand this delusion of the world. that everybody shows a nice face, and they might not be so nice. But that's got nothing to do with my belief that in the end there is an infinity of divine here that's even more present there than it is here. Because here I know why I'm acting. I know why I do everything I do. Why? Because I want credit in the end. Because I see my animal soul every day. I'm very familiar with it. And whenever there's a chance, it comes out. And it says that's really what I wanted. I wanted to feel superior. That's my need. What about the intellect in the? Let's just finish it. So the intellect in the animal. So what is that? So that's like saying that the animal soul, as opposed to the intellectual soul, it has an intellect, but the intellect is there entirely to serve itself. It's just that's what it wants. So that intellect is not entirely wrong. That's what it means that there is an intellect in the animal, which is also something high. It's very limited because it's in the animal soul, but that intellect has a lot of seichel to it. It's not stupid. It's not just wrong blatantly. And in fact, what is it called? It's called ingenuity. That if you want to bring out ingenuity in somebody, you have to go to that intellect. Let's say it another way, that the intellect in the university professor is not very creative. It sort of like floats along. If we come across a new theory, great. If we don't, that's also good. But with the animal soul, the intellect is ingenious. It says it's persistent, and it has to find an application for every bit of knowledge that I have. So maybe somebody would say you don't have to. Not everything that you know do you have to apply, but that's how the animal soul does. So it's the mother of all ingenuity. It's the mother of all new things that comes out. And finally, the animal. Okay, you take. There's something called electricity, which in theory is, for 200 years people were playing around with electricity until somebody like Thomas Edison comes along and says, well, let's figure out how to light our homes with this thing called electricity. He's an animal soul type of intellect. He's not the believer in the intellect. Because he wants it to be practical. He wants it to come down. Somebody asked here, how does a teacher know he's a teacher? I think the main thing is that whatever he explains, first of all, he doesn't feel that it's his. It doesn't matter what it was. It all belongs to Hashem or to my teachers. It all came from somebody else. And then in the end, it's also that I didn't do anything. That everything that I taught, it's nothing new. It's like I don't deserve any credit for it. It's anyway, everybody knew this. Like if you feel all the time that when you're talking, everybody knows everything you're saying, that you didn't reveal anything new. It was just one big. Said anyway. So we're out of time. So Mamish have to go.